to the Viking Age podcast. It's the official podcast of the VikingAge.com. My name is Chris Schad. I am a contributor for the Viking Age, as well as Bring Me the News, Zone Coverage, and the Brookings Register. We do this every Monday and Thursday night right here at 6:15 p.m. Central Time, right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. But if you miss us, we're in podcast form the very next day on Apple and Spotify. And however you consume us, of course, don't forget to rate, comment, like, and subscribe so you can spread the word and never miss a new episode. Per usual, we have a guest for our late week show. You can see him on the screen already, so we will waste no time bringing him in. You can listen to him all over the Locked On Minnesota podcast network. He is a man of many hats, a producer, a host, and Vikings insider. Most importantly, an OG guest of my old Homer Horn podcast. So if you listen to that, you'll know who this man is. His name is Sam Ekstrom. What's going on, Sam?
Well, I realize I'm being rude to those watching on YouTube. I've got the hat for branding purposes, the Locked On hat, but I've got shadows on my face. So if you'll indulge me here, I can turn on the lights and then people can actually see. How'd that go? I think everyone loved seeing the shot there. This is also my dog over my shoulder. That's Captain licking himself. So we got a lot going on here.
We're gradually getting into like YouTube form. Like when you first logged on, it was just the SE and the thing like, oh, we're going on YouTube. And then, then we got the light. Now we got the dog. Everything is starting to come together for you. I like it.
Yeah, it's good to be back though. This has always been one of my favorites to come on, Chris. So we got a lot to talk about today.
Yeah. And like I was saying off of air, we really have you at a good time because T.J. Hockenson, if this were a rap song, he'd be like, my ear, my back, I want a new contract. Actually, that would be good. Sweet. That would be a sweet strike chant, honestly.
Hockenson strikes me more as a country singer, though, with the hair and just the personality. So can you put that to a country twang?
I don't know. Not on. I think that's Matthew Collar's wheelhouse.
Not to put you on the spot. Yeah.
If we had, my wife left me and my back hurts and I bought all these $16 beers at the Wild game and now I'm broke and need a new contract, something like that. I don't know. But yeah, TJ Hockenson. Shortly after I got off the podcast on Monday, there's a clip of TJ making the rounds on social media. He was asked about his ear infection, his new contract, how negotiations were going for that. And he basically vowed that he would be out there on September 10th against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Judd Zolgad tried to get a little more information out of him. Did not really succeed. And then the news dropped today, Kevin O'Connell saying, well, yeah, now his back hurts. So the ear infection is apparently good. The back is starting to, hurt a little bit. And according to Diana Rossini, who hit Twitter a little bit this afternoon, TJ Hockenson wants to reset the tight end market with a deal that is in excess of $17 million a year. So I'm just going to ask you a very simple question to start. How worried should we be about this TJ Hockenson thing? Because it feels like it's starting to get ugly.
I think you should be worried if you want TJ Hockenson on this team long term. I believe TJ when he says he's focused on September 10th. I believe him when he says he wants to be ready for the regular season. But I have been a skeptic really this whole time with this thing. And I kind of think there's something more to it than an ear infection and a back injury. It's hard to question, unless you look down the guy's ear canal, whether he actually had that ear infection. Maybe there's an ounce of truth to it. Maybe it didn't actually last 3 weeks. But then for the back issue to pop up as well, it's very, very interesting, very coincidental. And if we think we know Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, he's allergic to giving out long-term deals. And there's really nothing against TJ Hawkinson's case, right? He's young. He's 26. He's productive. He's not super injury prone. He fits like a glove in this offense. He plays a position that is, it's fairly rare to have a high end tight end in this league. They don't grow on trees, right? So in his mind, he's saying, why wouldn't you sign me? Like there's nothing that you can argue that's going to make sense because Dallas Goedert got paid $14 million a year plus, and he didn't have 1,000-yard season on his ledger. T.J. Hockenson doesn't either, but he was also the second most productive tight end last year in yards. He was the fourth most productive tight end in yards 2 years ago. I mean, he's got some good stuff on that resume. Now, if it's a matter of 17 versus 14 over 4 years or 5 years, maybe they can come to an agreement there. But we've never seen Kwesi give out a deal longer than 3 years, right? And that was Garrett Bradbury for $15 million. Rip it up after 1 year, right? We've never seen him make a real commitment. He's got commitment issues, Chris. So they might be a long ways away on this contract. If Kwesi's offering 2 and 14 and TJ wants 5 years, 17 million per, we might have a problem on our hands. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at Cole Kmet, who also signed a contract. Never had a 1,000-yard season either, but he got a 4-year, $50 million extension with the Bears with $32 million guaranteed. So I'm trying to think of math. It's over 10. I don't think that's quite 15. Is that 12.5 million a year? I don't know. It's somewhere in that ballpark, but I mean, it's just it's reinforcing what you were saying about these tight ends. The market is starting to go up. It's starting to catch up with wide receivers, and especially in the case of receivers who catch passes like Travis Kelce. He admitted he's underpaid, but he also likes winning with the Kansas City Chiefs. So he's not exactly, it's not number one on his radar. George Kittle, of course, had the even better quote where he said, I could give two shits about my contract, but both of those guys are going to get massive amounts of money. I guess the thing that kind of irks me about this whole thing is you mentioned it. Kwesi seems allergic to giving long-term contracts. He wants that flexibility, right? That's probably why we didn't see Kirk Cousins get an extension. That's probably why we're waiting on Justin Jefferson right now, who might actually be waiting on Nick Bosa to sign his deal because he's going to want to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL. But I mean, it just seems odd that the Vikings didn't say, okay, 26 years old, this guy's a staple of our offense. Let's lock him in, build our foundations, and let's get moving. It just seems like there's a holdup in this whole plan. What do you think is the biggest holdup here? Is it money? Is it term? Is it where do you think the line is being drawn here?
Yeah, I think that Kwesi is such a Wall Street guy that he buys the dip, right? He sees undervalued commodities like Marcus Davenport and Zadarius Smith, Dean Lowry, and he buys them up. He buys the dip. He also sees commodities that are potentially overvalued and is hesitant to buy too high. So you look at Danielle Hunter. He improved his stock last year. He had a healthy, productive 17-game season. Kirk Cousins won 13 games, 8 fourth-quarter comebacks. He improved his stock. They've been hesitant to negotiate. Justin Jefferson, of course, improved his stock. Greatest wide receiver for the first 3 years in any wide receiver in NFL history. His value is at an all-time high. And T.J. Hockenson had his best year, arguably, as a tight end. And for all the reasons I mentioned, his stock is up. Kwesi doesn't like to negotiate when the stock is at an all-time high. And I think that's probably what's playing into it. I think that T.J. Hockenson probably sees himself as a market-setting tight end right now. Probably wants Darren Waller money. I think you can make an argument that he hasn't done enough productivity-wise to merit that yet. Now, it is a little muddied because a lot of T.J. Hawkinson's time has been with Detroit, right? 3.5 years, and then half a year in Minnesota. So if he's pointing to, well, look what I did in the half year here, that is kind of a tough case for him to make. But I do think the term could be an issue, too, for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. I don't think that he's ever going to be in the business of giving out 5-year deals, especially with large guaranteed sums. Kwesi thinks in 2-year increments, right? He's gone out on the record and said, we don't know what's going to happen in 3 years down the road. We don't know what's going to happen to, player arcs or their health or their productivity. Look at Danielle Hunter in 2019. He would have commanded $20 million per year if he'd signed that at that time. And then look what happened to him. Injury. And he's battling now every year just to get a contract. So I think Kwesi is probably, this might be the future. We're probably going to encounter a lot of these situations where Kwesi is hesitant to reward a star even if they seem deserving.
And that's the opposite of what we saw in the previous regime, where it was like as soon as you outperformed your contract, you got a new one. They would just rip it
Yeah.
up, with the exception of Dino Hunter, who seems like he's been trying to get more money the second he signed his contract extension. But is there a point where if you're the Vikings, do you go ahead and you just say, screw this, this isn't going to get done. Let's trade TJ Hockenson and try and recoup some of that value, because they gave up a second round pick. I believe they gave up, I can't remember what the pick was, but I mean, they gave up a lot of draft capital to bring him in. And now they're going to have egg on their face if they can't come to a contract extension.
Yeah, it was a third in the next draft. It was a 2 and a 3.
Yeah.
So that's a hefty price to pay. And yes, if you let him walk, you recoup probably a third round compensatory in the following draft. Does not quite equal out. Maybe they, in the back of their mind, think that they can tag him. But what have we learned in the NFL? If you're trying to tag a legitimate star, bad things happen. Holdouts happen. Tension rises. It gets messy. And maybe Kwesi thinks they can secure him this year. They can tag him. They can secure him next year. And there's your 2-year window that Kwesi likes to operate in. Would they trade him? I think it would be silly. I mean, I think it would be, I think it just doesn't make sense if you're trying to be competitive, because what are you banking on? Not your defense. If you're really banking on Brian Flores' impact being the difference maker and turning you into a top 10 defense, it's not going to happen.
Well,
Your
and
money.
you mentioned, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, and you mentioned the dips, you're like, okay, their value's at an all-time high right now. If TJ Hockenson, let's say, I think he was on pace for like 900 yards if he was with the Vikings for a full season. So let's say he gets like 750. His value doesn't go down. I mean, he's still going to score touchdowns. He's still going to be a security blanket for Kirk Cousins. It might even be more by the time next year, because George Kittle and Travis Kelce might get new deals. Look at Justin Jefferson. Like, I mean, the odds of him increasing last year's yardage total, and we said this last year, are pretty slim. But if he still winds up getting, I don't know, 1,600 yards, like, he's still going to want top receiver money, because that's still elite receiver production. I just think that I don't want to say like he's scared or like frozen in fear or anything, but it's almost, you said it perfectly. He's afraid of commitment right now. And with this competitive rebuild, it's all about, okay, we got to win our 9 games and, build for the future and everything else. It's like, it's all been kind of present, and there's been very few moves towards the future.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that in the present, their ticket to winning games is having an awesome offense, a kick butt offense where you've got Addison, Osborne, Jefferson. Running back room might not be quite as fearsome without Dalvin Cook, so we'll table that. But the tight end room is great. Josh Oliver, I think, is going to probably have his finest year as an offensive player. T.J. Hockenson is a top 5 to 10 tight end in the league, and hey, they love Johnny Munt too. You've got pass catchers galore, and that's your way to win the division. It's not your defense. It's your offense. And TJ Hockenson was a huge part of that last year, and there's probably an argument to be made that he's your number 2 pass catcher.
This will be a trend throughout the show, but what's your prediction? Do the Vikings sign TJ Hockenson to a contract extension before the start of the regular season?
Yes. I think they do. What's it going to be? I don't know. I'm thinking mid-level, like 3-year deal. But I think it'll be at a sum that keeps Hawkinson's camp happy. I'm guessing $15.5 million.
I think that's going to be the wave of the future with NFL contracts. Because I mean, I think back when we were kids, we would see like the 7-year deal all the time, right? And just have the funny money on the back end. I think agents are kind of wising up to that as our players. I mean, Kirk Cousins won't sign anything past like a 2-year deal, where he might want a 3-year deal. We don't know that for sure, but DK Metcalf, he signed a 3-year deal. I'm trying to think of other quarterbacks that may have signed just short-term deals just to lower. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, he renegotiated his deal to a 2-year deal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think short-term deals are going to be more of the norm, and maybe that's it. Maybe Hockenson's camp wants something a little more long-term with more security, and the Vikings want something a little more shorter term. I just think that that's the way that most teams are going right now.
Yeah, short term could benefit both parties. It would be less of a commitment for Kwesi and his commitment issues, but also if it's a 3-year deal, in theory, Hockenson could cash in again when he's 30. I think the tight end can last a little longer. Their shelf life is pretty decent in the NFL. He could sign another big deal at age 30, especially if he stays productive up until then. And then the salary cap's going to be, what, $8 billion in 3 years probably, because they've got all this Amazon money and they've got these TV deals that are so lucrative. So the cap is only going to go up and up and up, and agents and players recognize this. And that could play into the Justin Jefferson deal as well. You know, we're all talking about 5 years, $175 million. Could be 3 years.
Yeah. As someone who dropped the money on NFL Sunday Ticket, I can definitely confirm they're making a lot of money to make that salary cap go up in the next couple of years. But that will be interesting to follow with T.J. Hockenson. Another interesting storyline that just will not die is that Trey Lance is available again. The 49ers named Sam Darnold their backup quarterback behind Brock Purdy. And that's interesting because Trey Lance was the 3rd overall pick in the 2021 NFL draft. NFL Network's Ian Rappaport theorized, did his little windy fingers or whatever, that the Vikings could come calling for Lance to make a deal. Nick Mullins and Jared Hall been okay this preseason, but my question for you, should the Vikings make a call about acquiring Trey Lance?
Yeah, why not? His value can't be any lower. He was just named the 3rd string quarterback behind Brock Purdy, who's played 6 games, and Sam Darnold, who was a flameout with his last team. I mean, you can't get any lower from a value standpoint. This might work out great for the Vikings because word is that they tried to negotiate this in the offseason. That was one of the reports. I think it was Rossini. I think Rossini was all over the Vikings beat today. So if they tried to negotiate in the offseason, I'm sure the price tag was higher then than it will be now. And if this Kirk thing is not going to come together, and I think the betting money would be that it doesn't, you would like to have a Trey Lance in your building. What's the risk? Going into his 4th year on a rookie contract, I'm guessing, so the 5th-year option at this point they won't have decided yet. That would be the Vikings' decision. They can probably pick that up if they want. I don't know. And then you can, kind of do the experiment thing. You can have him compete with Jaren Hall, see who's better, kind of what the Titans are doing. They've got Levis and Malik Willis and a veteran stopgap. Maybe that's what the future holds for the Vikings. But I see nothing wrong with trying to get a former top 5 pick at the lowest possible value. The Minnesota connection is fun and marketable. It's not everything, but it's cool. And I actually think Trey Lance has a lot of talent. Like, I watched him in joint practices last year. He's got a cannon. I mean, certainly you can develop that. And hey, maybe he's a bust, but you know what? This is a really cheap way to acquire a former top 5 pick. So I'm actually all for it. You can easily move on. It's not like you're paying him top quarterback salary. So shouldn't be a big deal if they do it.
I think this is a deal they should make if the price isn't astronomical. Like you said, it should be lower now. Everybody knows that Kyle Shanahan, he just wasn't a fit there, I think. And I'm starting to wonder if Shanahan had any input at all on that 3rd overall pick, because we look at the quarterbacks that Shanahan has had success with, they're the Kirk Cousins style, where they're kind of the statuesque pocket quarterback with a little bit of athleticism to kind of wiggle out of things. But, Kirk Cousins, then you have, Jimmy Garoppolo was a disciple of Kyle Shanahan. You had, now you have Brock Purdy. Now you have Sam Darnold. Trey Lance is a different animal. He's not as accurate as those guys. He's got a cannon of an arm, but he doesn't really know where he's going. And he's an athletic freak that can run with the football. I'm wondering, it just seemed like Trey Lance didn't get a fair shake in San Francisco to me. because Shanahan wanted his guy. And, when you look at Trey Lance's starts, there are a couple of starts in injury relief. Maybe he wasn't ready his rookie year, and that's understandable because I think he's only played in like 12 football games since high school or some ridiculous number like that. And then his first start last year was in a monsoon. His second start, he breaks his leg and he's out for the season. I mean, that guy needs to get on a football field. And if you get him under the tutelage of Kevin O'Connell, I would be willing to take a bet, because the other thing that this does, it gives you a security net, because right now going into the offseason, Kirk Cousins isn't under contract. And if you decide, hey, we want to move on from Kirk Cousins, if you have Trey Lance on your roster, you could do something like the Green Bay Packers did, where you don't really know if he's going to be good or not, but you can sign him to that 1-year extension, or I think it was either 1 or 2 years, but they did that instead of exercising the 5th-year option. And that way, you don't run into a Daniel Jones situation where he blows up and you have to pay him $40 million all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's a good way to do it. It's just a matter of whether the 49ers want to, have egg on their face.
Yeah, and I suspect the price to get Trey Lance would be some kind of pick exchange, something involving mid-round picks. Maybe the Vikings toss in a backup player to give the 49ers depth. I mean, I think the price is super low. Honestly, I do. But, if you're going to use the argument that, well, you're acquiring someone who was named a third-string quarterback behind Sam Darnold and, Brock Purdy, he was also named the starter over Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy last year. So, at one point, He was entrusted with that franchise, and then you can't fault him for what happened with Brock Purdy. I mean, no one could have anticipated that Mr. Irrelevant was going to be this legacy who went undefeated and led the 49ers into the playoffs and might have won a Super Bowl if he doesn't get hurt in that game. That's not Trey Lance's fault. Trey Lance has, run into some just difficult circumstances right now. The problem is, and it is a legitimate concern, is just the lack of reps, right? The years are building up. We're going on, 5 years now where you can, he's thrown like equivalent passes to 1 year of an NFL quarterback. It's bad. It's bad. So you do have a bit of an uphill climb. But again, I think there's nothing wrong with acquiring multiple options at quarterback. Rick Spielman was just committed to this idea of you can only have one guy and you can't threaten him with anyone else. Why can't you have a competition there? Why can't you just shoot a few darts and try to make it happen? So I'm actually all for it. I'm pro Trey Lance. I don't think it's going to be a big price tag. Obviously, if it is, then you have second thoughts. But hey, what did we just say about Kwesi? Buy the dip. This is the dip. This is the Trey Lance dip. So he might want to get in on this.
So I'm looking at Trey Lance's college and pro stats right now. 2018 was his freshman season. He played in 2 games at North Dakota State, probably in mop-up duty. 2019, he played in 16 games. So that's 18 if we're counting at home. That was the national championship season. 2020, the FCS season gets wiped out postponed due to COVID-19. He plays in 1 exhibition game. So in his college career, he's got 19 games. Flip over to the pros. He played in 6 games in his rookie season in 2021. So that would be 25 games. And then he played in 2 games last year. So he's played 27 games since coming out of high school. And I know a lot of people, I actually saw a meme by Eric Thompson, and I'm not singling him out. I mean, I think there's a lot of Vikings fans who feel this way, but it's like the Family Guy scene, where he's got the mystery box and Peter Griffin says, oh, well, a boat is a boat, but the box could be anything. It could even be a boat. Like, that's how people feel about Kirk Cousins. And I started thinking about this morning because I bought, are you a big gamer, Sam?
No, what's the opposite of big game? Really. What the opposite of big? Big. That's not
very. You don't own anything. You've never picked up a PlayStation controller in your
life. Basically, that's me.
Yeah. So the Madden franchise. As a gamer,
I've heard of it.
When I was a kid, that was the one game I was excited for every year. I would go and get it. I just mash the hell out of it, and it was awesome. Madden has become the Kirk Cousins of video games, which makes Kirk the Madden 24 of quarterbacks right now. And people like yourself may not know what this means, I'll throw it down for you. I bought the game last week out of curiosity, and there are some positives and there are some negatives. People love it, but some people hate it because they have these X factors that turn everyone into superheroes and force you to smash your controller. Not that I would ever do that, but I mean, we're just kind of going down the rabbit hole here. It also takes like 3 hours to sim a season because the user interface is trash, but I'm not going to go on a big like rant about the game right now. I believe that people don't actually like Madden. They just play it because it's what available. And everybody looks at the old alternatives as like better. Like, yeah, this is fun, but NCAA 14 has better gameplay. Sure, it's great, but NFL 2K5 has a better franchise mode. With Kirk, you could say the same thing. Like Kwesi said it himself, he's good, but he's not as great as Patrick Mahomes or Tom Brady. He makes Case Keenum look like Case Keenum, where like Christian Ponder made Case Keenum look like Brett Favre. You could say other similar things like Kirk O'Chains was awesome, but 2017 Case Keenum, that was a fun ride. Kirk is good, but remember 2009 Brett Favre? Or, people lose their minds every time Dante Culpepper is brought up as one of the greatest quarterbacks in franchise history because Kirk Cousins is fine. Your alternative here is the same with Madden. You can go back to an old favorite that might be a little bit outdated. In this case, it would be the next angry quarterback, or you could wait for next year and hope that you find a suitable upgrade. Like that's just kind of it. That's the whole Kirk Cousins conundrum. And when somebody like Lance gets mentioned that we don't know, we don't have that security blanket behind him, that's where I think management gets nervous. And I think that's where fans get nervous when they think about the possibility of acquiring Trey Lance. Did all that make sense, or do we got to hit the sticks?
No, I mean, I do see people complain about the new Madden games a lot and how the old games were better. I remember playing NFL Blitz when I was a young man, and that was a lot of fun.
Oh, that was elite. Yes.
Yeah, too much hitting, though, for today's day and age.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Vikings fans, Kirk apologists, God bless you. And I was very supportive of Kirk last year and even recommended that he get a 1-year extension. But you got to let go of the reins at some point, right? All these teams in the AFC that are now thriving all had to do this. They all had to say, screw it. We're moving on from you, Phillip Rivers. We're moving on from you, Andy Dalton. Those were the boats. And they went for the mystery boxes, and it worked out great for them. And there are examples where it doesn't work, but you won't know unless you try. And if the Vikings go that route, you get the money. You can build your roster. You can have some flexibility. You don't have to nickel and dime and worry about giving out these big contracts.
You don't have to stare T.J. Hockenson into oblivion over a 3-year deal or whatever. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
It really could be a liberating situation if you just embrace it. And if you make a mistake, I mean, and comes down to Kwesi's decision making, but I think he's the kind of GM that would recognize if it seems to be a mistake, you can move on quickly and try again. And that's why it doesn't hurt to have a couple options, even if they are both mystery box options next year. And that is, again, if you don't extend Kirk, which at this point I think is more unlikely than likely.
What do you think happens here? Do you think the Vikings unite with Trey Lance, or do you think, the 49ers just hold their breath and stomp their feet a little bit longer?
After all this conversation we've had about this issue, I kind of feel like the Vikings have been flirtatious with a lot of bigger names and nothing's come of it. Dalton Reisner? Kareem Hunt? Nah, we'll pass. And I wonder if the same thing happens here. That like if this was all kind of a charade, there was buzz because the Vikings and 49ers have been seemingly linked for years about a quarterback trade, and it could easily be someone who undercuts with a bigger, sweeter deal. They offer a higher pick, and Kwesi might really dig his heels in. He's got his scruples. He doesn't want to overpay to buy the dip, right? So I actually kind of think they don't actually make the deal, but I am supportive of them trying.
I do wonder what the 49ers are doing because they have such a good roster right now. And I mean, Purdy's looked okay during the preseason. I mean, hopefully that elbow holds up and he doesn't have any other setbacks. But I mean, if he goes down and you're throwing Sam Darnold in there, I mean, I don't know. I know Kyle Shanahan's an offensive guru. We're told about that all the time, but I mean, if that doesn't work, they might burn another year of that great group because Nick Bosa wants his money, and he's not going to hit the field until he gets it. The final topic that we will discuss today is that we finally got to the end of the preseason. The Vikings have hosted 2 joint practices with the Arizona Cardinals this week. They will play a game on Saturday to conclude the preseason. Kevin O'Connell said no starters are going to play in the game, and Wes Phillips might just give KOC might just give Wes Phillips the play calling duties so that he can have the night off or do whatever he wants to do on the sidelines. What do you think about the Vikings plan to not get the starters any work during this preseason?
Yeah, it's super boring, to observe. It's made August a little bit of a drudgery because I mean they're going into these games without a fullback, which is kind of a key piece of their offense, and obviously the wide receiving core, the offensive line can't protect, and the quarterbacks can't do anything. It's frustrating to watch when you know their potential and how little of it they're showing. And I think they built a little equity with this approach last year. The Rams built equity with this approach. The Packers, adopted this approach, and it seems to work okay. So you can't get too upset. This is more about giving guys who otherwise wouldn't have a chance to play those reps, and maybe that's more valuable for their development and figuring out who your bubble guys are going to be that make this roster. But it does make for a far less compelling preseason. If you watch highlights, Chris, from like the 2000s, man, teams cared. Teams cared. Baltimore Ravens, they still care. They won 24 preseason games in a row. Not everyone is doing this. But I think they are very content getting these physical joint practices in 4 days total between the Cardinals and the Titans, where they do a lot of 11-on-11s. Kirk Cousins gets a lot of volume. All the top players are out there. The only difference is they're not tackling to the ground. I think that's probably worse for the defense, and as we've seen, they've had their share of tackling issues and giving up 280 yards on the ground. That's not great. I can't imagine that's a big, Brian Flores is a big fan of that. And that's going to be the mystery, right? It's the group that's already the red flag is the group that's not maybe getting those key reps. So I worry about that a little bit. I don't worry about the offense. I think they'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm seeing right now is just there's a lot of guys that I'm not really sure are going to make the team. I mean, there's a lot of I don't know. I was going to say there's a lot of depth at some positions, like wide receiver. I think there's a lot of options there. And I think the Vikings have done a good job stockpiling. Offensive line, not at all. If any of those guys goes down during the regular season, I think the Vikings are screwed, especially after watching Oli Udoh on Saturday against the Titans. And then you also have the defense in general, just the second stringers. Like, what do you think of a guy like Lewis Seen, who is getting extensive action in the preseason right now? And I mean, he's missing tackles, but he's in position to make some plays. Like, where are the Vikings on him? Because as a first round pick, he's going to be an important part of this whole competitive rebuild.
Yeah, Seen might be the most polarizing player in all of camp right now. They've mixed up his positions. He's been, free safety for a while. Then they kind of moved him up in the box. He has been buried since minicamp. I mean, from the get-go, Josh Metellus was in this new role. They clearly were convicted about that and put Metellus up in the pecking order. So Seen has been the safety for this entire time. Then you've got Theo Jackson playing really well and almost usurping Seen. But Seen will flash with these unbelievable feats of athleticism. In the first week of camp, he made one of the most unbelievable interceptions you have ever seen when he crashed from deep safety all the way to the sideline in a flash diving interception. People went crazy. And we've seen that explosion in the games, right? He's getting in position. He's getting in position in these run fits. He's covering ground. I think he could be a force in the run game if he could tackle a little more. That, to me, seems coachable. if you can just coach him up a little bit or maybe just get him more reps to where he can be more comfortable doing that, I think that there's a lot to work with there. It just so happens that you have a really deep safety room, and it might not be a knock on scene. It might be more of a compliment to Josh Metellus and the effort he's put in for 3 years to get to this point. Harrison Smith, obviously, and Cam Bynum is solid and probably under-discussed. But Lewis Cine will have his moment. I mean, Josh Metellus is a free agent. Harrison Smith might retire. There will be opportunities down the road, and I think Lewis Cine he's absolutely the athlete that we hoped he would be. He's just got to refine it.
Is there any other spot on the team right now that you feel is still up for grabs heading into this game against Arizona on Saturday?
I think there's spots everywhere up for grabs. I mean, I think that, first of all, right, there's no template. So are they going to keep wide receiver 6? I think that spot is up for grabs. I think that Tristan Jackson's made a really strong case. Jay Ward, is he going to make the team as a 4th-round pick? That deep safety room could be problematic for someone like Jay Ward. The defensive line is a complete cluster. I don't know. I can't discern between Jaquelin Roy, Asezi Odumewo, T.J. Smith. I think they're all kind of on that same level. So I think there's actually a lot of bubble spots up for grabs. I think you could go position by position. There's probably half a dozen positions where I'm conflicted about, who's going to claim that final spot and then how many they're going to keep. It's going to be a very fascinating cut down day. And remember last year how much Kwesi wheeled and dealt with, Armand Watts deal. And was that when they picked up Rager? Like there was movement on that day. So we might see more of that and throw all of our 53-man projections in the trash because Kwesi comes in at the last second and does something like that.
Yeah, if this team is set, and I mean, I do think there's going to be a trade or two. I honestly, that backfield, I think something needs to be done because if Alexander Madison goes down and history suggests that running backs will miss a game or two over the course of a season, like I don't trust Ty Chandler. Everybody's talking about Kene Nwangwu. He hasn't even seen the field. And when he's on the field, like he never got carries over David Montgomery. He never got carries over Breece Hall. I understand they're NFL running backs, but even like the last 2 years, it's like he never ascended to even a meaningful role on offense. So, I mean, if you're banking on those guys, I mean, are you just going to sit there in like week 10 and be like, oh, I guess we forgot about the backup running back position. Granted, they did draft Dwayne McBride in the 7th round, but he just does not look ready. I mean, we all just can't be as Isaiah Pacheco out of college, which I know you haven't seen the show, but the bit is, the Pope meme where, he's holding up. Mm-hmm. That's basically NFL GMs with Isaiah Pacheco. It's just, Isaiah, look at him. Oh, so much value. Oh, like Dwayne McBride just doesn't know what he's doing yet. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, he's a 7th round rookie, but there's a reason he was still there in the 7th round. That being said, let's say that there's minimal moves made. They don't move the needle. What are the Vikings' expectations for this season?
I think their internal expectations are to be competitive. I think if they were honest with themselves, I think they would say the Super Bowl is probably a long shot. Last year, that was their once in a blue moon run. You don't get that 2 years in a row. If you look at the quarterbacks all time that have had 7 or more fourth quarter comebacks in a season, Stafford, I think it was 16, Derek Carr in 19, and Drew Brees, I think in 16 as well. They all had 7 or 8. The next seasons, all of them dropped off the map to like 0 comebacks, 1 comeback. The law of average, the regression is a very strong force. The season is going to play out so differently, I think, than last year. Your only hope is that you can combat the forces of regression with a stellar offense that has a second year in the system and doesn't have those hiccups in quarters 1 through 3 and prevents needing to come back in the fourth quarter. And I do think that's somewhat of a possibility, but I don't think you're going to win 13 games. I think the Vikings Should still be favored to win the division, though. I think that they have more going for them than Detroit. And I just can't trust the Lions until I see it. So I think the Vikings are favored to win the division. I don't think they're favorites to win the Super Bowl by any means. I wouldn't call them a contender. But I think that 10 wins is kind of where I would fall right now.
I think their best chance at success is channeling the early 2000s Vikings. And I'm talking 2003 and 2004 specifically. So those teams, I don't think the defense is that bad, but I think that the Vikings are going to need to score all the points they can handle because remember that offense. I mean, they had a backfield by committee. They had a great offensive line. They had Dante Culpepper at quarterback, which I mean, even if you want to get in that Culpepper Cousins argument, they're both quarterbacks that can put up their stats. And he also had one of the greatest receivers of all time, Randy Moss and Justin Jefferson. I think there's a lot of comparisons there. And I think this is going to have to be a year where the Vikings get aggressive. Can Kirk do that? I don't know. He did it for most of last year, but when the year was on the line, 4th and 8 at US Bank Stadium against the Giants in the playoffs, he checked down to TJ Hockenson. I think the Vikings need to get their foot on the gas and keep it down all season in order to make a run similar to what they did last year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You know what the ultimate irony is, too, Chris? As bad, as atrocious as the defense was last year, think of how many games they secured with a late clutch play by the defense. And that, I think, was unsustainable. As unsustainable as the offensive play was in the fourth quarter, one of the best like in NFL history when they got to the fourth quarter. The defense recovered a fumble in the end zone against Buffalo. They intercepted a pass in the end zone against the Jets. They stripped, I think it was Waddle in Miami. They intercepted Kyler Murray against Arizona. And I'm probably forgetting a couple others. That kind of clutchness on defense is going to be hard to duplicate. So even if the offense is as clutch as it was, the defense may not be as clutch as it was, and you might lose some of those back and forth battles in the final 2 minutes. So there's a lot that can go opposite of the way it was last year. So you just got to be awesome on offense. You got to score 30 points a game. You got to beat teams by 20. You got to score early and often, and you can't have these. The 3-and-out thing was a huge problem. Field position was a problem last year. You need to be better in those regards.
Last question for you. Are you fearing Baker Mayfield heading into week 1? Because he was named the starter, which I didn't even know there was a competition in Tampa Bay. So congrats, I guess. I don't know.
You beat Kyle Trask. Throw a party.
Yeah, congrats. You beat Kellen Mond. Let's all celebrate.
So I think Baker cares a lot. Like, I think that he's super competitive, and maybe his status now as a journeyman will fuel him. Crazy things happen in week 1 too. So I'm not ruling anything out. I mean, there's good receivers over there. There's a good interior line, which scares me. They've got a first-round pick, Kalijah Cansey, that could wreak some havoc. But ultimately, Baker makes too many mistakes. Baker has thrown 64 interceptions in his career thus far. And he's only got one season over 500. That was Kevin Stefanski's first year as the Browns coach. He is a pretty consistently below 500 quarterback because he makes a lot of errors. He takes a lot of risks. So if Brian Flores can fluster him and force him into a couple picks, which is very possible, yeah, I'm not scared of it. Famous last words, though, right?
Pressure is going to be key, I think, because the Bucs have the receivers to exploit this defense with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Russell Gage, I believe, is still on the team. There are receivers there, and their running game might be a little bit underrated too, because I believe Schad White kind of took over at the end of last season, but it should be a winnable game. I'm not fearing Baker Mayfield, which isn't a slight. It's just, as you mentioned, he's an average to below average quarterback. And I think that should be the first step towards getting this season on the right foot. All right. So before I let you go, though, I got to ask, what's going on with the Locked On Minnesota Podcast Network right now? Because you're basically everywhere for them. So I'm just going to let you explain all the hats that you wear, and people can take that information and do what they want with it.
Well, thanks for the chance to give a plug. Yeah, I'm on the Ron Johnson Show as the producer 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then a roundtable on Friday. I'm also hosting the Minnesota Football Party, where we talk pretty much Vikings every single day. And on Thursdays, Minnesota Sports Rankum. Myself and Luke Inman, we rank controversial issues in Minnesota sports. A lot of Vikings talk on there as well. So we're just having fun. Locked On Sports Minnesota. Subscribe, please. We'd appreciate that. Check out the content. And we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Also on the Sirius XM app as well.
And where can people follow you on Twitter, or, X, or social media? All the good stuff.
Yeah. Is it tweeting still, or is it twixing? I think I prefer twixing.
Twixing. That sounds delicious, actually, but go on.
I'll have some delicious Twixes coming from joint practices at Sam Ekstrom, first and last name on X. Joint practices tomorrow. Vikings and Cardinals take 2.
Well, Sam, thank you for coming on. As always, we'll talk to you again down the road, but that's all the time we have today on the Viking Age podcast. We do this every Monday and Thursday right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day, but however you consume us, rate, like, comment, subscribe, do all those cool things so you can spread the word and never miss a new episode. For Sam Ekstrom, I am Schad. We'll talk to you next time on the Viking Age podcast.